A few years ago, I was working in Zaire, and during that time, the people went on a rampage in certain cities, and they called it in French pillage or pillage, and they tore up factories, they tore up the neighborhoods, they tore up all kinds of things. They did, as I recall, in excess of $1 billion worth of damage. When it was over, the plants where they had worked were just shells of what they'd been before. And these natives then basically said, well, why don't you rebuild them so we've got jobs? And the people said, not on your life. If you're going to tear our buildings apart, you're not going to have any jobs. And so thousands of people were out of work. There wasn't the normal commerce that they needed to feed themselves, and they were in poverty. So you ask yourselves, why will people tear up the place where they live? Well, you've got Molotov cocktails, you've got tear gas. These are weapons in another brutal showdown between police and protesters. Who are the protesters? Where are they coming from? Who are these people in the so-called war zone? 2 more people have also been shot in Ferguson, Missouri.
And the children there are also being affected. The start of school has been canceled. There's a no-fly zone over the city, and the National Guard is there, too. Heather Sells has that story.
Overnight, the National Guard kept its distance from the street protesters, but still, Ferguson looked in some ways like a war zone, with police firing tear gas and demonstrators fighting and throwing Molotov cocktails. It's why law enforcement is calling for peaceful protests.
I want to encourage the good people of this area to come out and protest tomorrow during the daytime hours. Make your voices heard when you can be seen and when you're not the cover for violent agitators.
A number of Ferguson residents say that while they want to protest the shooting death of Michael Brown, they do not support those resorting to violence.
We are looking for peace, and these other guys are just looking for an opportunity to break in different businesses.
We've seen reports where there are some outsiders coming in, and I believe that's where the problem comes. That's where it lies.
CBN reporter Tom Buring on the ground in Ferguson explained.
The reality is there are protesters. The great deal of them during the day are peaceful, trying to convey a message, understandably want to be heard, but when the lights go out and the sun sets and law enforcement comes out, it actually incites the crowd, which to a great extent are people coming from the outside of the area to come in with tremendous rage, tremendous anger.
Preliminary autopsy results show 18-year-old Michael Brown had marijuana in his system and was shot multiple times.
At least 6 shots. Could be more, but at least 6.
A grand jury could consider what happened in the shooting as early as Wednesday, and that will determine whether Officer Darren Wilson is charged. Some initial reports suggest that Brown was facing Wilson with his hands raised, while other witnesses say that Brown was charging Wilson. Attorney General Eric Holder is heading to Ferguson Wednesday as the Justice Department has started a quick investigation into Brown's death. For many believers in St. Louis right now, there's hope in the peace of Christ. Pastors are organizing another prayer meeting tonight and working towards reconciliation and forgiveness.
The first part of reconciliation is to getting all the powers that be, all the varying opinions through leadership to the table to talk.
In the meantime, extreme tension in Ferguson. Authorities have canceled the start of school. There's a no-fly zone over the city, and the National Guard is in town to stay for now. Heather Sells, CBN News.
Well, what I gathered the story, and it's still, the facts aren't totally clear for any of us, but this great big guy, this gentle giant they call him, went into a convenience store and he wanted some cigars, so he stole some cigars. And when the clerk tried to stop him, he pushed the clerk aside, pushed him down, walked out into the middle of the street. Now, was he high on some kind of drugs? That hasn't come out yet. Do we have a blood test in this autopsy? Nobody's released any evidence, so we don't know. But the next thing is, we understand he was walking down the middle of the street and obstructing traffic, which says to me he probably was high on something. And he He knew that he had committed a crime, but we say the police maybe didn't know about it yet. But that is, again, unclear. So then did this giant man charge the police officer, and the police officer tried to defend himself. It doesn't seem like there was some kind of wanton act of assassination or execution. That just doesn't fit the pattern. But on the strength of one man who robbed a store and was shot, all these thousands of people start tearing the city of Ferguson apart, and people are coming from as far away as California and New York to get in on the party. It is disgusting what's happening, and anybody that contributes to that should be absolutely ashamed of himself. This is a time for calm, but one man was shot and killed. We don't have the facts yet, and the time is now to establish exactly what happened in a calm, orderly fashion. But this looting, this violence, this killing, other people have been killed. I mean, this is just unreal. It's way disproportionate for anything that happened. And you ask yourself, what is wrong with people who would destroy the city where they live? Well, in other words, in other news, the Kurdish fighters in Iraq, the Peshmerga, are warning that the Islamic terrorists there will soon target the rest of the world, including USA. John Jessup has more of that story from our CBN News Bureau in Washington. Here's John.
Pat, Kurdish warriors say they're the front line of defense against the radical Islamic State terrorists and that they need help. Chris Mitchell brings us that story from Kurdistan.
President Obama acknowledged the victory of Kurdish forces at the Mosul Dam.
If that dam was breached, it could have proven catastrophic.
The capture of the dam by the Peshmerga is a significant achievement, but the battle around the dam still goes on. For example, this road leads straight to the Mosul Dam, about a 40-minute drive. But this is as far as the Peshmerga will allow us, since they say the road up ahead has been mined by ISIS.
South of the dam, there are still members of ISIS, and we want to clean that out as soon as possible.
We sat down with Ali Hussein, a district commander in Makmur. It's about an hour's drive outside of the capital, Erbil. Peshmerga forces drove ISIS out of this area several days ago. He described the kind of enemy they're fighting.
When they controlled this area, they started to kill people, kidnap women, and slay people in the streets. This is the way they control other areas. They persecuted Yazidis and Christians and threatened the Christians to either convert to Islam, pay the tax, or be killed.
Hussein said U.S. airstrikes have been effective against ISIS, but emphasized ISIS is better armed and says the U.S. and the West need to provide the Peshmerga with much-needed weapons.
Two things are very important for us: to be armed by the United States, as well as be trained by the United States, because we have the experience. But even if we have heavy weapons, we need the training in order to use them.
He said Kurdish forces now find themselves at the point of the spear in the battle against global jihad.
Right now, Kurdistan is fighting the terror on behalf of the whole free world. The terrorists of ISIS have gathered here from everywhere in the world, and they pose a threat to countries all over the world, from Australia to Europe and other countries.
He said their fight is the same fight as the U.S. and the West. While President Obama pledged no more U.S. troops on the ground, the Peshmerga believe the needed boots are already there.
The battle of the whole world moved here to Kurdistan. Because we are the people of this region, we know how to fight against ISIS. We know the area and we know what we need to do. So this is why we need the support of the world in order to stand against ISIS.
Chris Mitchell, CBN News, Makmur, Kurdistan.
Pat, the Peshmerga have proven themselves to be a reliable fighting force.
I've been calling on help for the Peshmerga ever since this whole thing began. There was no question they needed help, and they're brave fighters, but they need up-to-date weapons. You see, ISIS has stolen gear from the U.S. armed Iraqi forces, and they are using those more sophisticated weapons. Peshmerga can win, but they've got to have ammunition. You have to have bullets in your gun. You can't fight with sticks and spears. And what they're saying is true. But you see, we held on to that fiction that Iraq had to hold together, that the central government had to be honored, and that we could not show favoritism toward one breakaway region. Well, that was a fiction. That was something that was foolish. And then Obama said, well, until we get a new prime minister, we're not going to act. In the meantime, ISIS is gobbling up every bit of territory they can get their hands on. So we dithered, and we dallied, and we waited. And then finally, we're getting in the game, and we're starting to win some, but there's a lot left to go. But what they're doing is saying they're going after us. Now, I want to read you something. This is from the Muslim Brotherhood. Marched through the streets of Cairo. They said, quote, "We are afraid not of death, but we desire it. How wonderful death is. Let us die in redemption for Muslims. Jihad is our course of action, and death in the cause of Allah, our most precious wish." That's who we're fighting against, ladies and gentlemen. These are crazy terrorists, and ISIS is worse than any of them. And they say we're coming to Washington, and there's going to be a bloodbath in Washington, D.C. We've got to stop them here, and we need to do something, and now we're starting to do something. It's still not quite enough, but we're at least getting in the game, and we've got to stop these fictions that don't make any sense. We have to confront the enemy on the ground, and if we got Peshmerga as our surrogate, let's back them to the hilt. One thing I know, knowledge is power, and we have something called Islam, religion of war or peace. We're in a battle, and you might want to know who your enemy is and what they think and what they believe. These are direct quotes from the Quran, direct quotes from the Hadith, direct quotes from the history of Islam and the history of Muhammad. I think you will find it extremely well done, researched carefully by those who speak Arabic fluently and are fluent in the Islamic faith. So we'll send this to you if you want it, and it's free. Just call in, and we'll make it available to you. John.
Pat, another example of the Islamic terrorist threats against the world. ISIS has issued a new warning for America. According to Reuters, the threat came from a video on YouTube. It showed a blood-stained American flag with the phrase, "We will drown all of you in blood." It also showed edited video clips of militants shooting U.S. soldiers and an American beheaded during the Iraq War. So far, the terrorist group has focused on gaining ground in Iraq and Syria to impose a self-proclaimed Muslim caliphate. Well, Americans are now more supportive of getting involved in Iraq than they were just a month ago. A new USA Today Pew Research poll finds now, by a margin of 44 to 41%, people say the U.S. bears a responsibility to do something about the violence in Iraq. Last month, Americans opposed that idea by 55 to 39%. CBN News spoke with the former owner of the private security contracting firm Blackwater about what's happening in Iraq. Eric Prince says Iraq's crisis today comes as a result of a failure in U.S. leadership.
Thousands of dead Americans, dead allies, tens of thousands of wounded, all for very limited effects. And to have, and really, I come back to that window of opportunity 4 years ago, that diplomatically Maliki lost the election. He should have been forced out, and he wasn't. Huge failure on the part of the Obama administration.
Says it's critical that Iraq finally has a new prime minister. He says the main job will be to convince Sunni Iraqis to join the government and reject the ISIS terrorists who they've been helping.
Military victories drive diplomatic breakthroughs, and if he's able to cut off and crush the ISIS capability to rain terror, and I think he reaches out to the Sunni tribal leaders out in Al-Anbar province and say, look, we want you as part of Iraq. We're not here to oppress you and seek retribution. That's probably the best way forward. But they're going to he needs real capability to do that. That's a wonderful theory, but ultimately it comes down to what do you make happen in that grid square on the ground.
You can find much more of Eric Prince's analysis at cbnnews.com. Well, more than a third of Americans have no retirement savings at all. A new study from Bankrate.com found that 36% of Americans haven't saved anything for retirement. Breaking down the numbers by age, the survey found 69% of younger Americans from 18 to 29 haven't started to save for retirement yet. 33% of people from 30 to 49 haven't. The same is true for 26% of people from 50 to 64, and even 14% of people 65 and older don't have any retirement savings. Pat, those numbers are alarming, and I guess the one silver lining is that younger adults are starting to save earlier than their parents and their grandparents did.
Well, if they would only understand the exponential curve, if you can let your money multiply 9%, 8%, 10%, 6% tax-free year after year, it'll build up an enormous amount by the time 20, 30 years is finished, but you have to start early. And that's very important. But, John, what we've got to face right now is a graying population. The baby boom is the old pig in the python thing. The baby boom generation is coming through the python, and it's hitting retirement age right now. So the baby boom is going to stop buying houses, stop buying furniture, stop buying all the stuff they do for household formation, and they're going to start drawing down their savings. And if they don't have any savings, there's going to be an enormous burden on the government. And the government is already stressed out. $17 trillion worth of debt now we've built up is insupportable. So how are we going to pay for their retirement? So, Wendy, what's your solution?
So much more fun to save when the stock market's going up.
Well, it's fun to regardless. Because if you want to know, I can show you ways where, you know, there's stuff right now that pays 8, 9% just year after year after year after year, and it's real nice. And it's,
you are a huge fan of master limited partnerships.
You know, one of them, Kinder Morgan, this Richard Kinder is a financial genius, and he just decided he's going to merge into some of the little companies that bear their name, and those rascals have gone up beautifully. They're up, you know, well over 20% because he's going to take them in and add a premium. So the little goodies in there, in addition to the interest they spend, but there's several of them that are done primarily by Texas oil men, and they're good investments. They've been the master limited partnerships. That's just one way of.
Do you think the market's going to keep doing well? It's been on a roll for a while.
It is for now, but it's a little frothy, a little toppy, and it's probably going to tend over. It's a question of how soon. I think without question, it's been going up, 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 and it's been supported by the Federal Reserve Board, who's been just issuing money like crazy. Sooner they're starting to withdraw that stimulus, and when that stimulus goes out, then it's like air coming out of a balloon. It's going to start, you know.
So enjoy it while we can. All right.
Okay.
Virginia could soon begin issuing same-sex marriage licenses this Thursday, unless the U.S. Supreme Court intervenes. Attorneys have asked the High Court to stay the decision by a lower court to strike down a voter-approved ban on gay marriage. In a similar case, same-sex couples in Arkansas are asking the Supreme Court to let gay marriages go forward. A judge in Little Rock threw out the state's ban on same-sex marriage in May. More than 500 same-sex couples received marriage licenses before the state issued an emergency stay. Mass evacuations are underway in Central California due to fast-moving wildfires. People in some 13,000 homes and businesses have been told to get out as a 1,200-acre wildfire threatens the area. Evacuation orders have also been issued to 4 hotels in the community of Oakhurst, about 16 miles away from the entrance to Yosemite National Park. Classes for most of the Yosemite Unified School District were canceled today. Now remember, you can always get the latest from CBN News by going to our website, cbnnews.com.